Welcome to Qt Widgets and more. In today's episode, we will be looking at painting code. We've seen very little of that on this channel. We've seen model view, we've seen Qt Designer and Qt Creator, but painting of more than trivial things we haven't seen much of. So that is what we'll be doing now. So a fast recap. If you haven't watched the Programming with Qt Widgets episode where we've just recently been talking about painting, then maybe head over there, especially to learn about coordinate transformations. What we'll be looking at now is the example that I used in the previous episode to talk about font matrices. It's what you see here on the screen now. It has a grid, it has some font painted in a very large size, some regular Qt widgets up there, and we'll dive into the code to understand what is going on with this. We'll start a rather unexpected place though, namely in the UI file. If you thought about painting, UI files might not be the first place where you'd be thinking about that, because you simply do not write any painting codes in the UI file. Let's have a look nevertheless. What you'll see here in the Object Explorer over here is that we have a horizontal layout line. That's this one with these widgets up here. Then we have a Q label description. That's the label highlighted here. We got a vertical spacer. That's the one you see there. And I can shut up for 3 seconds until you realize what is missing. Okay, I can't shut up for 3 seconds. What is missing here is a widget on which I'm painting. In most code, what you would expect to see is a placeholder in Qt Designer for the widget where you'd be painting on, but I'm actually painting on this widget here where I do have the layouts already. And it's not very common to do that, but it's perfectly okay to do that. And it saves me one crucial thing, namely if I had right where the cursor is now, if I had a widget there, the custom widget for being the grid with boxes painted on, that widget would need to know about the text up here. It would need to be notified when I'm changing steps here. It would need to notify, because it was likely there the logic for the description was in. It needs to tell that. How would I do that? Well, these things would be connected to slots into that widget, and this widget would emit a signal going up there. Or even worse, the two might know about each other by having a pointer to each other. Not that pleasant. So doing it inside of the UI file and painting on the UI file itself, I don't have any of these problems. Okay, let's look at the painting code now. Where would you expect to find that? Correct, in the method paintEvent. That's the only place where you're allowed to paint onto the widget itself. Okay, granted, it can call functions, but it needs to start in paintEvent. And that's what we have here. But first, notice up here at the top, I have const expression auto scale equal to 20. What this line is a constant, hence the const expression, that is for all of this code. Maybe it should even have been in an anonymous. I'll just put it in there, huh? Because I can't spell anonymous. Oh, I could. Not again. In a namespace like this. Maybe it should have been in there so that it truly only was accessible throughout this file. But that's not the key thing. The key thing is that it's spelled out in capital letter scale, so that throughout the rest of this file I know it's one of those global constants for the painting code. And now, once I have learned to say anonymous, let me go and look at the painting code. The very first line of almost all the paintEvents that I have seen says painter, this. So I'm creating an instance of my QPainter, and that's where I'm drawing, and I'm drawing on this, meaning on the widget itself. If we go to Qt Designer again, let's just remember, and let's actually see the code in action. what you'll notice is the grid here is lined up with this stuff here, so we can't start all the way at the edge, we need to start a bit in. And also notice I have this label up here with a description, and there's a lot of space there and a lot of space there. And the way that I did that in Qt Designer was simply to give it a layout spacing of 40, so there's a lot of space there. But now that means that if I can find my way around, here we are. That means that my X and Y that I need to paint the grid on need to be offset a bit. The X need to go to the content margins of my layout and ask for left, so that's the amount of pixels to the left of the grid. And the Y, I need to go to this little fellow up here, description. You can see up here, object name description. So I'll go and ask for the description of its Y position, but that's at the top of the widget, plus the height. So that's top, that's now the bottom of the widget, plus the layout spacing. And that's the Y position that my grid should start at. So my grid starts at X, Y, that's this point that we have right here. Okay, but it's super annoying in your code to constantly need to write plus X plus Y throughout. So there's a small trick that simply is to say, okay, I'll translate my painter now. So from the rest of the code, at least until something else happens, from now on in the code, I do not think of this point up there as 0, 0. I think of this point there as 0, 0. Okay. And going back here again, you'll notice this F here and this F there, and OX for that matter, if I write Fox, is in rather large font. It's not font set point size, something tremendously big. It is the whole world being scaled by a factor of 20. And that's what this line does here. It says painter.scale, scale, scale. So my X coordinates, whenever I refer to coordinate number 3, then it's really 60 because it's 3 times 60. And similar for the Y coordinate. I could scale them completely differently if I want to, but that would make the user interface look somewhat weird. And now I'm ready to start painting. I'll draw my grid first, which of course need my painter to be able to draw the grid. Then I will check whether there's actually anything up here. So if I deleted all text, the grid would still be drawn. If not, it would have been blinking a lot in my eyes. So that's just a usability issue there. And then if that works, if there is something there, I'll go and figure out what step I am at now. Mstep is just an integer, so I'll convert that to the mode, and the mode is these different ways that I wanted to try and paint in the example. I'll translate my painter once again. So now I translate my painter to 5, 15. And if you go over here and look, let me just draw something here. 5, that's 5 in, and 15 down here. So I'm actually, again, changing what is 0, 0. And I need to remember that this time it's not 5 pixels and 15 pixels. It's 5 multiplied by 20 and 15 multiplied by 20. So that's 100 pixels in here and, well, 300 pixels down here. That is what I now consider 0, 0. And then I'll draw this box here. That's what we do here. Set italic on my painter. It's just a very simple method up here saying get the font out of the painter, set italic on that font, set that font back to the painter. I am so fed up of doing that throughout, so I just created this set italic method. And then I draw the code here. I figure out what distance, or this part here is basically how wide was that part that I drew, more or less at least, plus a bit of extra space. There's space in between the two boxes here. And then I translate the painter once again. And this time I translate the painter, so now this position here is 0, 0. I draw the exact same thing. You see it's the same method here. The only difference is that this time my painter's italic was false and now it's true. And that's exactly what you can see over here. Fox in non-italic and Fox in italic. Okay, let's have a look at the drawGrid method. I don't know if you'll be surprised, but hopefully you will find a joy in how simple that method is by now, simply because I did two very simple things. I translated so that this is 0, 0, and I scaled so that 1 pixel really is 20 pixel in reality, and that is what you'll see here. So first of all, let's start down here. I am iterating from X to width, and for each of those +1 here, I draw a line from that given X column, 0 to that given X column, height. So that's all the vertical lines that I'm drawing. See, I'm drawing them with just adding up 1 each time. Same thing here for the horizontal one. I'm just drawing up 1 every time, but notice there's a lot of space in between them. That is again the scale factor. There's actually 20 pixels in between them. And that's where you'll hopefully say, Jesper, you told us that you are scaling. And when I look at Fox down there, it is gigantic because that you scaled it by a factor of 20. Why do I not see lines that are 20 pixel thick? Actually, that small line that we have over here should have been the thickness of this whole column that you see here in the setup. And that I'll show you now. See, I set the pen, and the pen here is set depending on whether x modulo 5 is equal to 0. And if it is, then it's solid and it's gray. And if it's not, it's dotted line and it's light gray. Solid and gray, dotted line, dotted line, dotted line, and light gray. Yes, I know I'm not answering your questions yet. It comes right now. Observe that it says 0 here. Says 0, Jesper. You're telling us that. I understand that if it had said 3, then the thickness of the pen would have been 3, but due to the scaling, it would actually have been 60 pixels on the screen. But 0 multiplied by 20 is equal to 0, for crying out loud. Right, 0 is a special pen. A pen that is 0 is called a cosmetic pen. And a cosmetic pen is for drawing these outline of figures, for example, or drawing a line like we do here. And if you could just give me a break. Thank you. 0 is a cosmetic pen, and a cosmetic pen is used for something that should not be scaled. So that's why if you go and look here very carefully, and maybe I can show you by calling my magnifier. So here is, whoops, not you, over here. Here is my magnifier, and if I move in, you can see, well, I would have pointed with my finger, but that's not going to help you. But if you look at the cursor here, you can see clearly the right side of the cursor is well, there's a ladder step down from there, and if I just move it over, you can see it matches exactly one of these steps. So indeed, my line here is 1 pixel thick. Sorry for sneezing at you. It's this time of the year when I'm allergic to a comment that says I'm just too lazy to implement it properly, which this comment exactly says. Obviously, I am going too far because I am crawling from 0 to width, but width, that's the width of the screen in untransformed coordinate system. So that might be 300, but I should only have gone from 300 up to 300 divided by scale. It doesn't matter that I paint outside of the screen. But what is more importantly, and the reason why I could have liked this, is that I have a nice edge here. I would like to see the same edge over there, but I would need not only to not run there, but also in the painting code, I would need to paint less. And for the width, I would need to take the width minus the margin on both sides, because I already translated in the margin on one side and then divided by the scale. And for the height, it would be even worse, because I need to figure out what position did my grid start at and take that away, and the bottom margin, and then scale that. And I didn't bother with that. But hey, I'll leave that as an exercise for you. Let's have a look at the draw function here. It takes the painter and the mode that is, do I want to draw horizontal, advanced, bounding rect, and so on. That's what this whole example was about. I have a rect here that is being calculated in each of these functions down here. I create a font metrics on the font. I fetch the text from the UI. I create a lambda expression here for calling down there, and it makes it just easy to write draw boundary in each of these places where I want to draw the boundary. That basically the box that I am painting around. And if you have a look here at the boundary, you'll notice that it is not 1 pixel thick. It's actually 3 pixels on the screen thick. Trust me, or assume yourself. I'll show you how I did that. So I'm draw boundary. I set a pen to be a red pen that is 3 divided by scale. So this time I cannot use the small trick of a 0, because then it would be 1 pixel thick. And if I want to draw the pen with a different one, if I just said 1, then I would get a 20 pixel thick pen. So now I get 3 divided by 20, and that will then be multiplied by the 20, which will end up being 3 pixels on the screen. I draw the rectangle that I got in here, and the whole example was to show you how this rectangle that I got in was not the one that I expected. So I will then set the pen to be green and draw a rectangle again, this time bounded at 0,0, and then width and height from this rectangle. I'll set the pen back to black. I don't think in this example here as it stands now that is needed, but if I change some properties in a function like this, I better change them back again. Otherwise, I'll end up with unexpected side effects from calling a function like this. And then, depending on the mode, I will. Here I get the bounding rects, and I translate that with some data there, as we talked about in the previous episode. I draw the boundary, I draw the text, and I break. The final thing to show is the drawPoint method. Now remember what I told you. If you change something in a paint related method, change something on the painter, mind you, then better change it back again. Otherwise, it's a side effect that whoever called that, they thought they were painting something, but due to a implementation detail, something on the painter changed. And you can change it back again by setting the color back to what it was originally. Previously I set it to black. I should really have asked the painter for the color and then set it back to that color, even to be doing it 100% correct. However, some operations are rather difficult to change back. Imagine that I'm translating, I'm scaling, I'm shearing, I'm rotating, and now I need to rotate the other direction. I need to shear the other way, scale the other way, translate the other way. For that, it's good to know that all of these operations are really just matrix multiplication on the matrix behind the scene. And I can, instead of getting my hands onto that matrix, which would get my hands really dirty, I can simply do as I do here, painter save, that takes that matrix, push it onto a stack, and then at the end down here I say painter restore. It pops the topmost matrix off that stack and put that back on the painter. For technical reasons, the matrix are called transform, but it's a matrix operation nevertheless. I set the pen to be no pen, meaning, well, I don't see anything. The color to be the color that comes in, and then I draw an ellipse at this position, and I do this trick again of scaling. So what I really want to do is paint something that is 10 pixel in radius for X and radius for Y, and that's what you see here, 10 pixels radius and 10 pixels radius. And observe no pen. Yeah, so had that been a pen, we would have seen a black outline around the circle. Obviously, I could have set the pen to be also be red or the incoming color, but setting the pen to be no pen is just as well. Then I set it to be italic. I again should likely have, I can't even, I don't know, I don't think that the font is part of what the matrix is pushing. So I likely should have asked whether it was italic and then remember that and push it back. And here comes the trick. It has taken me 20 years to not understand this trick, but it works nevertheless, and I know how it works these days. What I want to do is that I want to draw this text up here, but I need to take this point and move a bit up from that point. So what I do, and by the way, I want it to be drawn in a font that is slightly bigger than the default font of 10 or 8 or 12 or whatever point it is. So this is bigger than that, but not as gigantic big as this. So what I do is that I translate to this point now. So I call this 0.0. And doing so means that the following line where I scale, now I scale down. I had scaled up to a multiply of 20. Now I scale down to 220, so 1/10. So the result is going to be 2,2 in the new scale. Anything changes coordinate when I scale except 0,0. It stays 0,0, which is why I translate. And then I scale or translate minus pose, and I don't understand why that gives me the right, it just works. The key thing is that now I've changed the scale of my painter. And that's why it was very important that I did the save up here. I changed the scale of my painter, and now I translate 5, -5, which is then 10, -10. So that's from this point here, 10 out and 10 up in real world pixels. I set the pen to be the color, I draw this text here, and yes, I restore at the end, so I get my original my original scaled and translated, not the one where I translate here and scale there and whatnot. That's it for this episode of Qt Widgets and more. If you feel a bit rusty, then check out the painting part in the programming with Qt Widgets training that we have out there. And I would also like you to take one step back and have a look at this code in your own pace and explain what is going on. The code is available on GitHub, so follow the link below and you'll find this whole code base. Play around with it and be inspired. I hope you enjoyed this walkthrough of a larger piece of painting code, and until we see again next time, have a great time.